In the forgotten corners of early America lie stories never written in any history book. Tales buried beneath centuries of silence. Here, we uncover those lost chronicles, where truth and mystery walk side by side. Welcome to American Shadows, where every story takes you deep into the heart of the past, and every echo carries a secret waiting to be heard. The Lost Dominion. Shadows over the Frontier. Chapter 1. The Stranger from Fort Cumberland. The year was 1757, and the Appalachian frontier stretched endlessly under a sky of cold gray. The war between the French and the British had turned the colonies into a chessboard of blood and wilderness. Beyond the military lines, the forest stood, vast, ancient, and uncharted, holding secrets older than any crown. On a damp October morning, a lone rider approached the settlement of Stonemire, a half-forgotten outpost built beside a narrow creek. His name was Captain Elias Granger, a former British soldier turned frontier surveyor. The dust of war clung to his uniform, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much death to believe in glory. His horse, a lean mare named Hollow, moved with the rhythm of exhaustion. The settlement barely stirred at his arrival. A few woodcutters glanced up. Smoke drifted from the blacksmith's forge. Children watched from doorways as Elias dismounted, tied his reins, and stepped into the only place in Stonemire that smelled of life, the Hanging Lantern Tavern. Inside, it was dim and thick with pipe smoke. Men talked in low voices about the war, the taxes, and the wilderness that pressed against their small world like a living wall. Behind the counter stood Thomas Barlow, the innkeeper, round, red-faced, and suspicious of every stranger. "You've come a long way, sir," Barlow said, polishing a mug. Elias nodded. "From Fort Cumberland. Captain Elias Granger. I'm here on commission from the Crown Survey Office." Barlow raised an eyebrow. "Survey work? Not much land here worth mapping." "I'm looking for records of a lost settlement," Elias replied, opening a weathered leather satchel. He pulled out a yellowed parchment, a half-torn map, ink faded and curling at the edges. "Ever heard of a place called Dominion?" The chatter in the tavern fell silent. Only the fire crackled. Barlow frowned. "Dominion? That name's older than this town. I heard it whispered by traders. A colony granted by royal charter, somewhere north of the Black Creek Valley. They said it vanished before anyone knew it existed." Elias's voice lowered. "I'm following the last rote of Lieutenant Harlan's detachment. He was sent to verify that charter 3 years ago." Barlow's expression darkened. "Aye, Harlan's men passed through Stonemire, never came back. Scouts found what was left of their camp, horses dead, fires long cold, and paper scattered like leaves. Folks said it was the Iroquois, but the tracks told another story. No battle, no struggle, just gone." The words hung heavy in the smoky air. Elias traced the torn edge of the map with his thumb. "Do you know this river here? The Black Creek?" Barlow nodded reluctantly. "Runs through the northern timberland. But you'd best stay away, Captain. People who wander there don't return. They say the ground itself moves underfoot, like it remembers." Before Elias could reply, the tavern door creaked open. A cold gust swept in, carrying pine needles and the metallic scent of rain. A man entered, tall, silent, with dark eyes that reflected the firelight. His face was lined with scars, his clothes a mix of British fabric and native leather. He moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had walked farther than most men dared. Barlow whispered, "That's Jonah Two Feathers. He guided Harlan's men into the woods, the only one who came back." Elias stood. Jonah Two Feathers. The man nodded once. You carry their map, he said, his voice low and even. Then you seek the same fate. Elias held the map forward. Tell me what happened to them. Jonah's eyes drifted toward the flames. He said after a pause, They found what they were looking for, but it was not land, nor gold, nor anything made by your king. It was older, something buried beneath the soil. The forest kept it. Silence gripped the tavern. Even the fire seemed to dim. Jonah turned to the door again. If you go north, follow no compass. When the river divides, choose the darker water. The Dominion waits. He stepped out into the rain, vanishing into the fog. Elias stood motionless, the map trembling slightly in his hand. He looked down, and for an instant, under the flickering firelight, the ink on the parchment seemed to change. New lines appeared, faint, like veins beneath skin, curling north into uncharted land. He blinked, and they were gone. But in the pit of his stomach, Elias Granger knew the course of his next journey had already been written, not by any king or cartographer, but by the forest itself.
Chapter 2. The Map of Half-Truths. The rain did not stop that night. It came in waves, battering the rooftops of Stonemire as thunder rolled over the distant hills. Captain Elias Granger sat alone in his small rented room above the tavern, a candle flickering beside him. On the table lay the torn map, weighted at its corners with bullets to keep it flat. He had seen many maps before, maps that lied, maps that saved lives, but this one was different. The ink shimmered faintly whenever the candle's flame bent, like something alive hid beneath its surface. The torn edge bothered him most. The missing portion led north into the unknown. From the window he could see the muddy street below. The tavern had gone quiet. Even the night creatures of the forest had fallen silent, as though the world was listening. Elias opened his leather journal, its pages filled with measured handwriting. He began to write, October 12, 1757. Arrived at Stonemire. Confirmed rumor of Lieutenant Harlan's disappearance. One survivor, Jonah Two Feathers, speaks of a lost colony called Dominion. The forest beyond Black Creek is said to be cursed. No confirmation of native hostility. Uncertain if myth or truth. He paused, dipped his pen again, and added, I will follow the river at first light. The candle sputtered. A soft creak echoed from the hallway outside. He looked up. No footsteps, no shadow beneath the door. He exhaled slowly, told himself it was only the wind, and closed the journal. Sleep came in fragments that night. Flashes of trees, old faces, whispers tarried by water. At dawn, mist rolled over the valley. The storm had broken, leaving the air heavy with the smell of pine and wet soil. Elias saddled Hollow, checked his rifle, and stepped into the street. Barlow stood by the tavern porch, mug in hand. You're heading north, aren't you? Elias nodded. To Black Creek. I'll be back in a week. Barlow frowned. If you're wise, you won't go at all. Men vanish in those woods like smoke in the wind. Elias smiled faintly. Then I'll try not to breathe too deeply. He turned his horse toward the northern trail. The road dissolved into mud and moss before he had gone a mile. The forest thickened quickly, the trees leaning close, their branches laced like fingers. The further he rode, the darker the morning became, until the sun was little more than a pale shimmer through layers of green. Around noon, he found signs of an old camp, half-burned logs, a rusted canteen, and a British military button half buried in the dirt. Harlan's men had passed this way. He dismounted, crouched, and brushed the soil from a wooden stake driven into the ground. The mark carved into it made his chest tighten. D.V., the initials of Dominion, Virginia, a colonial charter from before the war. Someone had been here before the soldiers, decades ago, maybe longer. From the tree line came a faint snapping sound. Elias turned sharply, musket half raised. Only the forest stood still. "Jonah?" he called out. No answer. Yet the sense of being watched crept over him, not by one pair of eyes, but many, patient and unseen. He remounted and pressed on. By late afternoon, he reached the banks of Black Creek, a wide, slow-moving river of dark water. The surface reflected the forest like a mirror. Just as Jonah had said, the current split into two branches ahead, one bright with sunlight, the other swallowed by shadow beneath overhanging trees. He dismounted and studied the torn map. The missing section ended just before this point. No indication which way led toward Dominion. Jonah's words echoed in his mind. When the river splits, choose the darker water. Elias hesitated. Logic told him to take the open path. Every instinct told him the same. But something in the stillness, a strange magnetic pull, drew him toward the shaded branch. He guided Hollow into the shallows. The horse snorted nervously, water swirling around its legs as they crossed into the gloom. The air grew colder. The smell of rot hung faintly. No birds called. After a mile, he noticed stone foundations half buried in vines, remnants of walls, chimneys, and broken fences. A settlement once stood here. Time and forest had swallowed it whole. He dismounted, tied Hollow, and walked among the ruins. Beneath the moss he could still see cobbled pathways, and in the center, the remains of a well, its wooden frame collapsed inward. On a cracked stone nearby, faint letters were carved. Dominion, 1694. Elias knelt, tracing the letters with his hand. The cold stone sent a shiver up his arm. Inside the ruined well, the darkness seemed endless. Yet when he leaned closer, he heard something. Faint, rhythmic, drip, drip, drip. He frowned. No rainwater should have reached that far down. He tore a scrap of paper from his journal, lit it with a match, and dropped it into the shaft. For a second, he saw it, a flicker of light reflecting off something metallic deep below, before the flame died in silence. A feeling, part fear, part curiosity, twisted in his chest. Whatever was buried here had survived centuries untouched. But as he rose, he noticed something else. Footprints. Small, barefoot, fresh. They circled the well, then vanished into the forest. Elias turned, scanning the shadows. Nothing. No sound. Only the slow murmur of the creek behind him. He loaded his musket quietly. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, from the trees, a whisper, carried like a sigh. "You shouldn't have come." He spun around, but there was no one, only a raven flapping away into the dusk. Elias exhaled, forcing his pulse to steady. He backed away from the well, mounted Hollow, and started back toward the creek. The last light of day slipped behind the trees, and as darkness fell, he looked once more at the map. The torn edge, the one that had always ended in emptiness, now bore a new ink mark, a small circle drawn right where the ruined well stood. Someone, or something, had finished the map for him.
Chapter 3. The Hollow Settlement. Night crept through the trees like a slow tide. Elias Granger rode in silence, the dim glow of his lantern swaying in rhythm with his horse's steps. The forest around him was an ocean of black trunks and whispering leaves. Every sound, a snapping twig, a rustle of wind, felt too deliberate, too close. He stopped at the edge of a clearing. The rain had returned, thin and cold. Through the mist, the ruined remains of wooden cabins rose from the undergrowth, tilted, rotted, their beams gray as bone. This was no temporary camp. Someone had once built lives here. He dismounted slowly. The sign at the clearing's entrance still stood, a piece of wood nailed to a splintered post, its words nearly erased by age. Only one letter remained clear enough to read. D. He raised his lantern. The faint shimmer of old paths appeared, almost invisible beneath the moss. Footprints frozen in time, doorways swallowed by vines. He stepped into the first cabin. The air was stale, heavy with damp wood. A rusted kettle lay overturned by the hearth, beside a child's wooden toy, a carved horse, its legs broken. He crouched, picking it up gently. Someone had lived here. Someone had vanished here. A sound broke the silence, a dull thud, as if something had fallen nearby. Elias froze, hand on his musket. He waited. Nothing followed. But the moment he turned to leave, a faint voice drifted through the rain. You came back. He swung around, lantern high. The cabin was empty. Shadows danced on the walls. He stepped outside, scanning the clearing. No movement, no figure, only the fog, thickening like breath around him. Then, from the second cabin, a flicker of light, brief, like someone striking flint. Elias moved toward it, musket ready. The door hung half open. He pushed it gently, wood groaning on its hinges. Inside, a small fire burned in the corner. Recent. The ashes were still red. Beside it lay a wool cloak, soaked but neatly folded. And above the hearth, drawn in black charcoal across the wall, was a symbol, two interlocking circles with a cross between them. He stared at it. That same mark had been on the military reports about Harlan's expedition, scrawled on their maps, carved into their supply crates, but no one ever knew what it meant. From behind him, a quiet voice spoke. It's the mark of the Covenant. He turned sharply. Jonah Two Feathers stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, eyes shadowed under his hood. You followed me, Elias said, lowering the musket. Why? Jonah stepped inside. Because you would not have come back alive. He gestured toward the walls. What is this place, Jonah? Who lived here? Jonah's gaze drifted toward the collapsed roof. The people who called themselves Dominion, settlers but not of your king. They came here before the wars, before any fort was built. They said this land was promised, not by England, but by something older. Elias frowned. Older? You mean a native claim? Jonah shook his head slowly. No, they were not welcome by us either. My grandfather said they spoke to the forest, and the forest answered. Outside, thunder rolled. The wind howled through broken walls, making them creak like voices. Elias unrolled his map, laying it on a flat board. I found the old well near the creek. Dominion's mark was carved beside it. Something metallic lies beneath. What did Harlan's men find there? Jonah hesitated. His jaw tightened. They found the covenant seal, a disk of iron covered in signs none could read. They brought it back to camp. That night the forest changed. Elias's brows knit. Changed? The air went still. No crickets, no wind. Then came the voices. From the ground. They thought it was the natives, but it wasn't. When morning came, the trees had moved. Their path back was gone. He paused. His voice dropped to a whisper. By the third night, they began to hear the same words, again and again. You came back. Elias's pulse quickened. And the men? Jonah's eyes met his. The forest took them. A long silence followed, broken only by the hiss of rain. Elias looked back at the charcoal symbol. So why return here now? Jonah sighed. Because if the map has changed, then the seal is calling again. And if someone hears it, he glanced toward Elias's satchel. It already has. Before Elias could respond, Hollow whinnied outside, a harsh, panicked sound. He rushed to the door. The fog had thickened so much he could barely see the horse's outline. The animal reared and pulled against the reins, eyes wide in terror. Then Elias saw them, faint shapes moving in the mist. Not men, not clear, just motion, low, fluid, circling. He raised his musket. Who's there? No answer. The shapes stilled. The forest fell silent again. Then when he turned back to Jonah, the man was already packing his things. They're watching now, Jonah said. The forest knows you found the mark. Elias's voice hardened. I'm not leaving until I find the truth. Jonah gave him a long, haunted look. Then pray the truth doesn't find you first. The lantern flickered. A gust of wind burst through the doorway, snuffing the flame. And in that sudden darkness, somewhere deep within the hollow settlement, came a sound, faint, metallic, echoing through the rain. Clang, 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 as though something beneath the ground had just awakened.
Chapter 4. The Iron Seal. The storm had passed, leaving the forest wet and heavy with the scent of pine and mud. Elias Granger mounted hollow, his thoughts tangled in the events of the night before. The fog hung low, curling around tree trunks like silent serpents, and the forest seemed to pulse as if breathing around him. Jonah Two Feathers led the way, moving with a careful, almost ritualistic step. Stay close, he whispered. Once we reach the well, everything changes. Elias followed, musket ready. The hollow settlement lay behind them, ruins swallowed by mist, but the sense of being watched persisted. Each snapped twig underfoot echoed like a warning. After an hour, they reached the collapsed well, the mossy stones slick underfoot. Elias dismounted, holding the lantern high. The dark shaft yawned beneath the earth. Something about it felt different in the daylight, almost heavier, alive. Jonah handed Elias a length of rope. We go down, he said, but do not touch the disc until I say. The seal is not just iron, it remembers. Remembers what? Elias asked, but Jonah only shook his head. They anchored the rope to a sturdy oak. Elias descended first, the lantern casting flickering shadows across wet stone. The well narrowed as he went down, the smell of earth and old water rising to meet him. At the bottom, the disc waited, a perfect circle of iron, larger than a man's head, embedded in the mud. Strange markings ran across its surface, lines and symbols Elias did not recognize, but somehow his eyes understood. They seemed intentional, like a language older than any he had ever seen. Jonah followed carefully, kneeling beside him. "It calls," he whispered. "If you touch it with desire or fear, it will respond." Elias reached out slowly. The metal was cold, almost vibrating beneath his fingertips. The air around the well thickened, and he felt a subtle tug at the base of his spine, not pain, but warning. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the ground. The disc shifted slightly, as though something deep beneath was moving. Mud slid around the edges, revealing the bottom of the well, which now appeared unnaturally deep. A voice, faint, almost inaudible, echoed from the depths. "You should not have come." Elias froze. "Who's there?" No answer. Only the slow drip of water, though no water flowed. Jonah leaned closer. "It remembers the covenant. Every hand that touched it has vanished or gone mad. You must take care." Elias studied the symbols. One marking, a triangle enclosing a spiral, caught his eye. As he traced it, the iron disc began to move, rising slowly from the mud. A dull hum filled the space, vibrating in his teeth, in his chest, in his bones. The lantern flickered violently. Shadows danced across the well walls, stretching and twisting like elongated figures. "Elias!" Jonah said sharply. "Step back!" But Elias could not. The disc seemed to pull him closer, magnetic, insistent. He felt a compulsion to understand, to know the forest's secret. A sudden sound startled them both, the snap of a branch above, and then a figure appeared at the mouth of the well. Not human, or at least not fully. A shape draped in wet moss and shadow, moving with impossible silence. Elias and Jonah froze. The iron seal vibrated violently beneath their hands. The figure reached the well's edge, and a voice, cracked and cold, hissed, "Leave, or join what sleeps below." Elias pulled his hand back. The vibration stopped immediately. The figure recoiled and disappeared into the shadows of the trees. Jonah exhaled shakily. "It is patient, but you have awakened it. The forest will remember your name now." Elias looked at the disc. It no longer moved, but the hum lingered, faint and ominous. He realized that the map, torn, incomplete, and mysteriously altered, was not merely a guide. It was a warning. "Do we take it?" Elias asked. Jonah shook his head. "No. The seal is not meant to leave. To move it is to invite the forest's judgment. But we must mark its location, and you must write everything. If anyone else follows, they will need to know what lies below." Elias nodded, writing quickly in his journal. Every detail, the disc, the markings, the shadows, the figure. He described the hum, the compulsion, the voice. When finished, he climbed out of the well. The forest around them was silent once again, the mist settling like a curtain. Jonah glanced at him. "You have seen enough for one day, but remember, dominion does not forgive curiosity." Elias mounted hollow, feeling the weight of the encounter pressing on his shoulders. He knew that what lay beneath the forest was not treasure, nor even gold. It was a secret older than the colonies, something that had survived empires, wars, and men's ambition. And now he had touched it. As they rode back to the hollow settlement, the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ruins. Somewhere deep within, beneath roots and mud, the iron seal waited. Chapter 5. The Whispering Woods. The morning air was crisp, smelling of wet earth and pine resin. Elias Granger led Hollow along a narrow trail, the forest thick and almost suffocating. The ruins of the Hollow settlement disappeared behind them, swallowed by mist, and the sun barely penetrated the canopy above. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, as if the forest itself resisted their presence. Jonah Two Feathers rode beside him, silent, his eyes scanning every shadow. "Stay alert," he whispered. "These woods remember. Every tree, every stone, every footprint carries a memory. The Dominion watches from all directions." Elias nodded. His mind still raced with images of the iron seal, the glowing figure, and the strange markings. The journal lay strapped to his satchel, ready to record every detail. Yet something told him that words alone might never capture what lay ahead. After an hour, the path widened into a small clearing. There, the remains of old log cabins, half sunken into the ground, moss-covered and broken, marked a forgotten outpost, likely one of the Dominion's minor settlements. Elias dismounted. The damp earth squelched beneath his boots. He crouched beside a foundation stone and ran his fingers over an inscription nearly faded away. C.H. 1703. Jonah shook his head. They left markers to remember, not to warn. Those who read them without respect never returned. A sudden sound made them both freeze, a soft, indistinct whispering, drifting on the wind. Not a single recognizable word, but the tone carried a familiarity that sent shivers down Elias's spine. The sound seemed to come from every direction at once, yet nowhere in particular. Elias swallowed, lifting his musket. "Jonah, what is that?" Jonah's expression was grim. "The woods speak. Not in words you'll understand at first, but if you listen, you will hear the forest's will." The whispers grew louder, rising and falling with the rhythm of the wind. They seemed to echo across the trees, bouncing off trunks, around rocks, and beneath fallen logs. Elias felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle. Suddenly, Hollow whinnied and backed away. Elias's heart leapt. Through the mist, faint silhouettes appeared, not solid figures, but shadows moving like smoke among trees. They circled the clearing, pausing, retreating, then advancing again. Jonah raised a hand. "Do not flee, do not strike. Only move with me, and you might see the truth." Elias followed, every sense on high alert. The shadows thickened as they moved deeper into the forest, guiding them toward a narrow ravine. Water trickled unseen beneath fallen leaves, and the air grew colder, heavier. At the bottom of the ravine lay the ruins of a wooden bridge, long collapsed. Elias could see faint footprints in the mud. Large, bare, human in shape, yet too precise, too deliberate. They seemed to lead directly toward a cave mouth, hidden beneath overgrown ferns and roots. Jonah stopped. "Here," he whispered. "The Covenant's presence lingers. The iron seal called, and now we are at the threshold." Elias's heart raced. The cave mouth was dark, yawning like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. He shone his lantern inside. Faint glimmers of reflective metal caught the light. Perhaps fragments from the seal, perhaps something else. From within the shadows, a voice, soft, almost melodic, floated out. "Turn back, or join what waits below." Elias swallowed, gripping his musket tighter. Jonah's hand rested briefly on his shoulder. "We have come too far," Jonah said. "The forest tests those who seek the Dominion. What waits ahead is old, patient, and unforgiving, but we cannot turn away, not now. They entered the cave. The air was damp, thick with the smell of mud, iron, and something older, decay, or maybe something alive that had lain hidden for centuries. The whispers followed them, echoing, overlapping, impossible to locate. A faint glimmer caught Elias's eye. Embedded in the rocky floor, half buried in centuries of mud, lay another disc, smaller than the iron seal, but bearing the same interlocking circles and spiral symbol. It pulsed faintly, almost as if it had a heartbeat. Elias knelt beside it, studying the markings. Another seal? Jonah nodded gravely. The Dominion's wards are many. This one is a sentinel. It guards the way forward. Only those who understand can proceed. The whispers intensified, swirling around them, tugging at their minds. Elias felt a pull, curiosity mixed with fear, his instincts screaming to flee, yet something compelled him to touch the disc. Before he could act, a figure emerged from the deeper shadows, tall, skeletal, draped in wet moss and blackened robes, eyes glowing faintly. It raised a hand, pointing toward the disc. Only the chosen may awaken what sleeps. Elias froze. Jonah whispered, "Do not let fear guide your hand, but do not hesitate. The forest does not forgive mistakes." The wind howled, carrying the whispers into a chorus of indistinct words, circling, growing, until Elias understood. This was not just a journey into forgotten ruins. This was an awakening. The Dominion remembered, and now it remembered him.